academic groups, and we really do not approve if in the same group there are several people who are doing the same country. Although maybe we will mix up your academic groups, in fact, because as I understand, mine is the only class which you have on Wednesdays, so we can change something with the purpose to make it more diverse and to help you to communicate with those people with whom you do not meet at the seminar group. So it will happen in the end of March when we have our last seminar, this module. But please start thinking about your country choice if you haven't started it yet. Okay? Any questions on this matter? If you have any questions, please don't be shy asking me. Now let's switch to essential part of our today's meeting. Okay, I'm preparing to go full screen with the presentation. Okay, so it's coming. We will continue discussing culture. And culture, in fact, is a pretty essential and diverse phenomenon. It includes acquired knowledge that people use to interpret experience and to generate social behavior. And almost all the time, we are encountering with all kinds of social situations. So we need to recognize what is happening. We need to decide what to do and how to react. And we do all of these things using cultural lens, which we acquire throughout all our lives, starting with our childhood. Culture knowledge forms values, creates attitude, influences behavior. So briefly, a characteristic of culture, something which we already started considering with you. Culture is something which is learned. We are not born belonging to Russian culture, Uzbek culture, French culture, Jewish culture. You can easily continue this list. Because biologically, all of us, we belong to the same species, Homo sapiens, sentient beings. We can interbreed easily with one another. And in fact, baby which was borrowed from one country could be successfully raised in other culture, in other country, despite all kinds of visible differences, such as the shape of your nose, hair color, the color of the skin, something which is summarized as races. Races, in fact, are not as essential as some people think them to be. Also belonging to a certain race, of course, that's a stimulus which will be recognized by other persons. Speaking about Russia, we still have a relatively low proportion of black-skinned persons. It started changing, but talking about other European countries, for example, other former empires like United Kingdom, France, you can continue this list. They really became a mixture of all kinds of races and ethnicities. Culture is something which are shared by those people who belong to a certain culture. For example, people who live in Russia, who were raised in Russia, they're able to speak Russian language. Well, some of them are better on that dimension. If you won't believe me, in fact, for many persons, including those ones who are anchors on TV or radio stations, it became a problem declining numerals, saying something like it's 365th anniversary of something. Just test yourself, say it in Russia, and test if you can do it correctly, yeah? My generation, we were trained to do it. Talking about your generation, well, some people can, some people cannot. So culture is shared with other persons who belong to this particular culture. We have some ideas, we have some values, we have some patterns of behavior which are common for those people who belong to Russia and Russian culture. And the same applies to any other culture in question. Let's take such an obvious example as comfortable social distance. Speaking about those people who live in St. Petersburg, we are rather northerners than southerners. And in the north, people prefer larger social distance while communicating with one another. If you have a choice, if there is an opportunity to distance yourself from the other person with whom you are not acquainted, you would probably will choose to be in some 1 meter from this person or something like that. It's even more dramatic in Scandinavian cultures and especially in Finland. People waiting for a bus at the bus stop, typically, they will have some 2 or 3 meters between them and the next person. In southern countries, in southern cultures, it's quite the opposite to what I just described. People tend to touch one another during the conversation. It could be okay even hugging by the shoulder somebody with whom you are not particularly acquainted, slapping the person with whom you are communicating on the back, and doing other examples of physical contact. In some cultures that's acceptable, and some others are not. A culture is something which is transgenerational. In fact, you and me and everybody who lives on this planet, except of those people who for some reason never met their parents and haven't had an opportunity to communicate with their parents. So if you're raised in a family when there were 2 parents or 1 parent, we tend to pick up a lot from our parents. It refers to patterns of behavior. It refers to values. It refers to attitude. Sometimes we do not notice it. We do not realize it because, talking about what was published in both popular and scholarly literature, it's easier to read a lot of publications concerning, for example, generational conflicts or something like that. Still, talking about scholarly research, between generational conflict is something which happens just to the minority of kids, not to everybody, especially when we start speaking about something which is really essential. And in fact, when you'll be getting older, you'll start realizing more and more how many things you have in common with your parents. Speaking about teenagers, yeah, some of them sometimes, they think that they're absolutely new generation which has nothing in common. And by the way, some people who make decisions, they could be scared by the young generation because young generation are not willing to share official values, something which is presented as propaganda. It will be worth mentioning just the protest which we recently had, and probably, well, from my point of view, hopefully we will continue having, because we have a lot of problems in our political system. Culture has symbolic meaning. Many objects which physically are not really remarkable could become a cultural object. And we already discussed it with you. A flag is a piece of cloth which was painted in different colors. Still, it could become a very essential symbol, so that in legislature of some countries, Russia is not an exception, there are special provisions which well, suppose that a person who hadn't shown due respect to a flag or national anthem or to some other symbolic object needs to be punished. There are some problems related to symbols. For example, once again, speaking about our country, speaking about Russia, St. George ribbon became devalued. I mean that orange and black ribbon, which initially was a symbol of military valor. And it was awarded to only those people who proved themselves as courageous persons, who were able to do some heroic acts. Now it became a kind of a commercial object. People started putting the St. George ribbons even on their dogs or whatever. And that is why, once again, that's ridiculous. State Duma, they even accepted special regulations concerning how St. George ribbons are supposed to be used, are not supposed to be used. Culture is something which is patterned. There are some patterns of attitudes and behavior which are reproduced by those people who belong to a certain culture. For example, it could be something related to religion. One of the impressions which I've got when I visited Ireland was something which happened every Sunday. Ireland, as you probably know, is a Catholic country. So a lot of people, including young people, will visit a church on Sunday morning. They will dress up for this occasion. They will spend some time praying or whatever. Despite, the fact that if you conduct a public opinion poll in our country, in Russia, and many people will say that they have some kind of religious affiliation, nothing like that happens in our country, especially in big cities, because people are not truly as religious as it's claimed to be in some publications. And culture is adaptive. We'll be wrong if we perceive culture as something which never changes. It does change. It could change quite quickly. Once again, it's absolutely obvious for those people who are Russian citizens, because before 1991, the country named Soviet Union used to be a communist country, and it disappeared pretty quickly. And a lot of things which were illegal, let's say, in Soviet Union, like capitalism, profiteering, and the rest of it, became an absolutely inherent part of our today's reality. Okay, let's move it. So speaking about model of culture, it could be represented as concentric circles, or sometimes it's also called an onion model. We have a core. A core are implicit basic assumptions that guide people's behavior. And these assumptions sometimes is not something which we recognize and are able to discuss and to understand consciously. It just sits in us. For example, this could be some ideas concerning how many kids is good to have for a family. If you ask a direct question, the majority of persons will probably tell you that kids are good, with some exceptions. Of course, I do know what child-free means, and I don't know that there are people who are adhering to this kind of ideology. Still speaking about how many kids people do have in reality in different countries, we will witness a lot of differences. Talking about Europe, and many respects in our country is a part of Europe. A typical number of kids for a family would be one or two, seldom three. Speaking about Oriental cultures, typically they will have much more kids, and they perceive it as something which is natural. Yeah. Some other basic assumptions could be assumptions concerning what will happen to a human being after a human being will die. Will a human being continue their existence in some kind of form? So religious people typically will assume that they will, or they will be replaced by new generations and will disappear for good. Another layer, and this layer could be observed even more. We can read about this layer, we can exchange information about this layer, we can make research on this layer, are norms and values that guide the society. Later we will discuss with you these norms and values in much more details than now. At this point, it will be sufficient just to mention that there are a lot of differences all over the world on this dimension. For example, something which we'll discuss with you today, some cultures are rather collectivistic. If this means that group is more important than individual, and group achievements are more important than individual achievements. It has some consequences. For example, somebody who is praising his individual achievements will be perceived rather negatively. It's not something which is socially approved. But praising something which is collective committed will be considered something which is really good. Finally, the outer layer of culture, explicit artifacts and products of the society, things which we use, all kinds of special arrangements which we use, well, how people plan and design their homes, the places where they live. Everything belongs to outer layer and is typically easier visible. For example, you can just walk along the streets in some other country, in some other city, and you can pick up a lot of cues concerning how people live in this particular society. Okay, so we already discussed it once again. An essential element in culture are values. Values are basic convictions that people have regarding what is right and wrong, good and bad, important and unimportant. And it's not something which is absolutely obvious. For example, is it good or bad being an empire to expand a certain country is controlled over land, to occupy lands which belong to different countries, for example. And empires used to be a way of living for powerful 19th century countries. Almost all of them used to be empires. France, Germany, Russia, United Kingdom, you continue this list. It looks like being an empire is not such an undoubtful value in 21st century. In fact, some countries which used to be empires like Sweden and stopped being empires some 300 centuries ago are doing quite well. They are doing quite well economically. They are doing quite well politically. They're respected by their neighbors, and they managed to make quite a visible contribution to world civilization. So that's the issue which your generation will need to address. It is really work for our country, for Russia, trying to be an empire and to restore what belonged to Soviet Union. Some of our leaders, people who form Russian government, they have the answer to this question, which is quite different from the answer which I would prefer myself. They have no doubt that being an empire is good. I disagree with them. In fact, typically a country wants to be an empire pays a pretty heavy price for that. So once again, as I mentioned, we will discuss values with you in some more details later. Values also could be in tradition because there are some global trends. For example, talking about what already happened in Europe, happened in the world, with few exceptions, many countries are willing and they have a positive attitude toward being a member of the European Union. And this implies that they have much fewer limitations. They can freely travel, they can work in other countries. Education, which was obtained in one country, will be acknowledged in another country, and so on and so on and so on. Our country, that's something which I would like to change. If it would depend on me, is still not included to this kind of common space. Traveling to other countries, we need to get visas. Speaking about education, which is required in Russian universities, only some of the universities, fortunately, a High School of Economics belong to the university which provide this opportunity. I acknowledge in other countries, and you continue this kind of reasoning. Yeah. Changes take place, for example, in managerial values. Well, Japan for a long time was considered to be a kind of absolutely indisputable example of collectivistic values and collectivistic culture. Still, recent research showed that individualism is on the rise in Japan. So global trends is something which is real. Global trends is not something which we should discard. Priorities of cultural values. Well, in fact, something which I will show you now on this particular slide is not something which is indisputable. This is a result of one of the research dedicated to culture and cultural values. Other researchers will disagree with some of the cultures represented here. Still, cultures could be also a good way to compare one culture to another. And that's what we will do, not this week and not the next week, but a week after that. We will discuss with you during our seminars, and we will compare cultures in different cultures, including countries of your choice, those countries for which you will be doing your project. So this is a list of top 10 values to the United States, to Japan. As you can see, it's different. In States, we have freedom on the top of the list. In Japan, belonging. And that's what illustrates one of the differences between individualistic and collectivistic cultures. Speaking about Arab countries, family security is on the top of the list. And the second one is family harmony and parent guidance. Parents, elderly are really respected in Arab countries. What about our country? What about Russia? As I already mentioned, it will be a topic for discussion at one of our next seminars. We will do with you and we will discuss it with you. So something which I touched upon this morning when I already had a seminar in one of the groups. There are some other important phenomena related to culture and cultural differences and cultural comparisons. Enculturation is the process by which individuals learn their culture in order to fully function within it. Some of this knowledge is acquired due to the phenomenon, to the process which is called socialization. From the very early childhood, we start learning particulars of the countries in which we are raised. And we will continue acquiring this kind of knowledge until we'll die. Another important phenomenon is acculturation. That's the process of psychological and cultural change as a result of contact and interaction between cultures. I already mentioned that I spent 4 years in the United States, and it was really important for me because it helped me to realize all kinds of similarities and differences which we can notice when we compare Americans and Russians. And I had to adjust to some of the expectations of my classmates. For example, something which is not shocked surprised me. The majority of American students, if they had a test or exam, do not share information concerning their grades with fellow students. And once I even made a really bad dramatic mistake. I was teaching a class in States, and after the test, I was preparing to announce publicly the grades which American students got. Luckily for me, my friend, another teacher who was an American, dropped to my class and he told me, Sasha, don't do it. You invade their privacy. It's not a good thing to do. In my country, in Russia, students, the first thing they do after they get their test results, they will share it with everybody. It's not considered to be private information. In States, it is. So individual and culture are in bidirectional relationships. We learn culture, and that's one direction, but we change culture too. And hopefully it will be some cultural differences between Russia in which your generation will live compared to what happened for my generation and some other previous generations. Our country will be better, our country will be more progressive, our country will be more successful in many respects. Other phenomena which we'll discuss during today's seminar. When we travel to other countries, sometimes you will get some positive experience. You will notice something which you like, which is pleasing to you. It could be anything. For example, it could be some kind of really exquisite cuisine. That's something which people who travel to France do expect, to witness. Or it could be something which is related to arts. Or it could be some achievements in technology, engineering, or whatever. That's one thing to pay attention. I will discuss it with you during the seminar. Another phenomenon is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is a tendency to use your own culture as a standard by which to judge and evaluate other cultures. And it could create some difficulties. For example, speaking about Russians, when we invite somebody to our place, and during the holidays, by the way, we expect those people who visit us to eat a lot and sometimes to drink a lot too. And we consider it to be a natural expectation, like, every New Year celebration makes us sick because we ate too much and some people drank too much. And then it takes several days to recover from this kind of experience. Comparing Russians with Americans, for Americans, that will be an absolutely alien idea. They tend to be much more reserved concerning food. This does not mean that they do not like food which has a good taste. But even those persons who are quite wealthy, instead of having a kind of regular lunch, can bring a brown paper bag with them and to have a snack which will have only some sandwiches or whatever. And it's not something which is typical to our culture, how I already mentioned. Sometimes we, instead of having positive experiences while visiting the other culture, we can experience something which is called culture shock. That's the feeling of disorientation experienced by someone when they are suddenly subjected to an unfamiliar culture, way of life, or set of attitudes. Well, pretty often it happens because you don't speak language and you're unable to understand what people expect from you. Or you have a certain need, and once again, you are not able to explain yourself. Sometimes it could be something related to particulars of a certain person. I have a friend. For a long period of time, she ran a traveling agency, and she specialized in sending tourists to exotic countries, to places like Australia, South Africa. So she told me a story. One of her clients, a person who was quite rich, traveled to South Africa. He stayed at the hotel over there. It was a five-star hotel, a really good one. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, he didn't take into account time zone differences. He called to that person who ran the agency and started complaining. What was the reason of his complaint? When he went to swimming pool, he noted there some persons, I don't remember how many, 2 or 3, who were sitting in wheelchairs. And he became indignant. He started scolding the person who, sent him to this hotel. He said, "You promised that I will be staying in a luxury hotel and appeared to be some kind of hospital for disabled people." Shame, shame, shame. It was a really difficult situation. It required, a lot of patience and tact from her part to explain him that in civilized cultures, people have different attitudes to those people who are handicapped in some respect. They want to include these persons into regular interaction with those ones who do not have this kind of problems. They do understand that handicapped persons are human beings like everybody else. Well, for some reason, and the reasons could be quite different, something happened to them, and they have some special features, and still they should not be treated in the way in which that guest who complained that he is surrounded by handicapped people performed. Okay, guys. Yeah. Now, what I would like you to do, I prepared a video, and that's a video concerning reverse culture shock. It takes 10 minutes, so I will publish this link for you in chat. That's what's just happening now. So please watch it. And during our seminars, we'll discuss this one and other related issues. And please come back in 10 minutes from now. Okay, guys? Have you got the link?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, guys. So I will stop sharing the screen for 10 minutes. Please come back in 10 minutes after you watch this video. Okay, guys, I hope that you are back now. And I hope that that video which you watched was interesting and instructive for you. As you can see, in fact, what was compared, that were the cultures who belong to the one of the most successful countries in the world. And as you can see, perception could be quite different. Like, what would we expect from a person who traveled to France? Well, probably at least some kind of cultural reflections, because France and Paris specifically was a place where there are a lot of places for sightseeing. As you can see, this young American person, female who traveled to France, she got somehow different reflections. All her perception was quite positive. In fact, she discovered that some things are definitely better in France. And by the way, speaking about professional careers, speaking about vacations, it could be a surprise, maybe even a shock for some of you, if I tell you what is the typical length of the vacation period for those people who start their professional career and work at entry positions. Just 2 weeks, no more. In our country, well, typically that's 24 days, almost a month. If you work in America, you need to work for some 10 years, sometimes even longer, before you will have an opportunity to have this long vacation. So, when we are comparing cultures, and on that particular slide, and that's why I decided to show you that video concerning the US and France, we will be comparing cultures on different dimensions. But in fact, it's not possible to measure the dimension at country level. What happens in reality, pretty often they measure this dimension surveying individuals, and then they make some conclusion concerning cultures. And as you see, when we are comparing individuals, there is quite a significant overlap between distributions for one country, this is France in this case on the left, and US culture in the right. Only a certain proportion of individuals are really significantly different and represent the differences between these two cultures. So, stereotyping. And that stereotyping means overgeneralization, simplification. Typically happens because of cultural extremes. So once again, the same two cultures, and if you take the tails, that what some people will mention as particulars of a certain culture. So some Americans will see French as arrogant, flamboyant, emotional, hierarchical, people who pay quite significant attention to hierarchy, to what social stratum somebody belongs, and emotional again. And speaking about stereotypes which some French have concerning Americans, they perceive Americans as naive, not really well informed, especially about Europe, aggressive, unprincipled, and workaholic. Of course, there is some truth behind some of the differences we just mentioned. For example, talking about this propensity of Americans being workaholic, that's true in many respects. And that's what I witnessed myself when I was initially a student and then a teacher in the United States. For example, for American students, if the teacher expects the students to read 200 pages of text for the next class, that's something which is absolutely normal. My experiments with Russian students convince me that, well, only some of them will follow this suggestion, will honor the suggestion. But not everybody in the United States is a workaholic. And of course, in France, there are a lot of hardworking persons, as there are hardworking persons in our culture in Russia. Still comparing Russians and Americans on that dimension, I would probably think that Americans work more and harder in many situations.
Excuse me, but Russian working week is much longer than American.
Pardon me?
Russian or work week is longer than an American work week.
Well, it depends. It depends, in fact. It really depends. Like, for example, it depends on what positions we are comparing. Talking about Russian managers and American managers, in many cases they have unlimited work a week. And what, in fact, really impressed me is the fact that in many countries they do not have classes for primary school, mid school, and high school kids on weekends. That's something is very good. And talking about the longevity of work days, you are right in that respect that in some European countries they are seriously considering reduction of the number of hours persons are supposed to work during a week, like, reducing it from 40 to something like 32 or something like that. Once again, any kind of across-the-board generalization would be incorrect. Speaking about the number of classes which American students have, once again, it's not as much related to how many classes they have, but the real difference is that they always have a choice. In fact, they decide what classes to take. We started developing this way too, but still we have a long way to go. Now, guys, coming back to cultural differences, in fact, even if people are aware that there are cultural differences and they're trying to take them into account, sometimes they fail. There is something which is called Chevy Nova Award. This award is rewarded to the companies who made some failures making advertisement in different cultures. Or put in more plain terms, translated from one word to another. For example, this famous phrase, which was titled for milk, got milk, when it was translated into Spanish. In Mexico, it appeared to be something equivalent to the quite different question, are you lactating? Speaking about Chevy Nova, in fact, that was one of most successful automobiles at American market. But when they started promoting it in Latin America, something happened, something famous, something, pardon me, something surprising and funny happened. Because Nova in Spanish, it means does not move. And well, some people started laughing, why should I buy a car who doesn't move? In fact, in reality, the sales for this car were quite high in Latin American too. Still, it became one of the examples which I referred to when we speak about this kind of meanings which could be lost in translation and the problems which could arise. Another examples from the same field. Clairol, the company who sells skincare stuff, they introduced their product under the name Mist Stick, and that was a curly iron, something that helps to make hair curly. Some females use it if they want to have curly hair into Germany. What they didn't know, like a person who translated it from English into German, and these two languages belong to the same language group, so probably they're quite similar, was the fact that mist in German slang is a word which is used for manure. Так называется навоз in German slang. So, you know, for example, buying for your girlfriend this current iron under this name in Germany would be a very doubtful decision to make. Something else, even more dramatic. This is baby food, which is manufactured and sold by international company, which name is Herber. Traditionally, they use this smiling baby face on the cans of product. When they started selling their products in Africa, they used US packaging with smiling baby face on the label, but they encountered with a complication they haven't foreseen. In Africa, some people are still do not read, are not able to read. And what they're used to, what you see on the image, on the package, is what you have inside. So some of them got really scared because they got a wrong idea that they make this food from babies, which of course was wrong. And it's not as dramatic as it used to be 20 years ago when it happened. Because for the absolute majority of countries, people can read now. Still, that's quite a telling historical, curious case. Yep.
Mr. Lissov, I have a good example for that. For example, when Nissan introduced their new car, Cup 2, in Russia, they had to change the spelling because they were typed as with a C, and when Russian people were reading it, they were reading Sartir.
Thank you.
So they had to change it to K.
I see. Thank you. I didn't know about that. That's funny too. A couple of more examples of this way. Yeah, thanks. We'll have an opportunity to discuss some more examples of this kind of blunders during our seminars too. But that's good that you brought it up during my lecture. Thank you. Pepsis. They had this famous slogan, "Come alive with the Pepsi generation." Those people who translated in Chinese, in fact, they confused characters, and that's easy to make in Chinese. And instead of the slogan, they came up with something which meaning was something like "Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave." Well, there was a crook in our country whose name was Grabavoy, and he promised to deliver something like that. But of course, that was nothing close to the intention which Pepsi had. So we really need to be careful when we are translating from one language to another. Coca-Cola's name in China was first read as Coca-Cola, meaning bite the wax tadpole, укуси восковой гриб, восковую поганку, or female horse stuffed with wax, кобыла, набитая воском, depending on the dialect. So then Coke, hired somebody who really could speak Chinese. They researched 400,000 characters to find a phonetic equivalent, Coca-Cola, translated to happiness in the mouth, which is much, much better, of course. The final example for this kind of blindness. Parker pens is something which people still use, even in the age of computers. In fact, if you are a CEO, chief executive officer for a company, you need to sign documents, sometimes very important documents from time to time. And that is why Parker pens, especially these ones, with golden writing point are considered to be a good gift, both for males and females. Still, they made a hilarious blunder when translated their advertisement slogan, "It won't leak in your pocket and embarrass you" into Spanish, because the word embarazada, which they use in Spanish, does not mean embarrassed, it means pregnant. So they actually really embarrass themselves by saying, "It won't leak in your pocket and make you pregnant." Quite a bizarre idea. And still, I don't think that people stopped, buying Parker pants in Spanish-speaking countries. They just laughed about that. Okay, some more serious consequences related to cultural diversity. Sometimes it could bring something which is named nationalism and ethnic conflicts. Speaking about ethnocentrism, it's almost its utmost development. It can become nationalism, the conviction that only your nation, the nation to which you belong, deserves everything good, and other nations are inferior. That's a shame, but this kind of attitude was quite common and was considered to be normal in the majority of European countries in 19th century, because people who lived in other parts of the world, they considered to be savages, barbarians. You can continue this list. In fact, very similar things happens to Europeans when they try to establish themselves in China. What happens? What's related to the difference in patterns of behavior comparing Europeans and Chinese. Chinese culture, in many respects, is ceremonial culture. People really need to learn how to behave themselves in social situations. And Europeans who started dealing with Chinese were different in that respect. All the time they spoke too loudly. They knew nothing concerning etiquette, and they made all kinds of blunders and mistakes all the time. Even more, on their pallid faces, when they got angry or agitated, the color of the face changed and became red. That is why Chinese nicknamed Europeans, and in translation into English, it would sound something like red-faced barbarians. That's not the end of the story. Chinese scholars try to understand why Europeans are like that, why they are not able to behave decently. And they came up with an easy answer. That's because Europeans have really bad diet, which is detrimental to their health. They do not eat healthy food. They eat unhealthy food. And that is why Europeans permanently suffer from constipation. In translation into Russian, constipation means zapor. So people who have this kind of problems, that makes them angry, that frustrates them. And Chinese scholars became convinced that Europeans will plainly die, and that will be a very unsightly death if they will not get lexical drugs which help, to get rid of constipation. Rhubarb juice, for example, was considered rhubarb at in Russian. Rhubarb juice was considered to be a kind of cure which could help Europeans at least for some time to function normally. So when people start comparing their own culture with other cultures, this comparison will not be all the time complementary to other culture. Now let's consider some issues related to nationalist conflicts and ethnic conflicts. So multiple, what happens in 20th century, what happens in 20th century, what happens in 21st century, multiple ethnic, religious, or linguistic groups will be combined with some types of inequality or injustice. Some of them will manage to take dominant positions, others will be subjugated. Repression or persecution of ethnic groups happens all over the world. That's a reality, unfortunately, still now. Nationalist conflict often occurs when a minority nation group has political control in the state over a majority nation group. That's the case in Syria, for example. Yeah. And it could be related to some important traditions related to how people obtain citizenship. In fact, there are two models of citizenship. They use French words for that, jus ali and jus sanguinis. You originated from Latin, of course. So when we are talking about jus ali, everybody who is born at a certain territory automatically becomes a citizen. When we're speaking about jus sanguinis, only those people who belong to a certain ethnic group, who have a certain blood, get citizenship. Historically, for example, the United States, that's a country which was founded and was dominated by immigrants, had jus ali as a guiding principle. Everybody who was born at American territory will get American citizenship. Well, that's what happened to my older son because he was born when I was in the United States, so he got American citizenship. No problem whatsoever. In European countries, typically, well, it was like that in medieval countries when model state times when model states did not exist. Then considerations related to ethnicity and blood became dominant. And everything changed again in France in Napoleonic times. Why? For a pretty pragmatic reason. Napoleon wanted more soldiers for his armies. And that is why it didn't really matter if somebody was born at Martinique, let's say, or in some other distant places. If this person was able to speak French and to carry a rifle and to participate in wars, this person will be granted a citizenship. So speaking about what happens today, well, it's still a problem. There are a lot of illegal immigrants. For example, the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, one of the promises he wanted to deliver and failed to deliver was to stop illegal immigration from Latin American countries in the United States. Yeah. And in Europe, there is a problem of refugees from African and Oriental countries, which are illegal migrants, but something needs to be done with them. So concerns related to nationalism, to raising up this kind of cross-cultural agenda, is that sometimes what happens are separatist movements. An obvious example was what happened in former Yugoslavia, which used to be a single state. And of course, well, what happened to the former Soviet Union? Some people never expected that, for example, Russia and Ukraine will become separate states. It happened, and now that's a reality. Sometimes it could be even worse, civil war and conflict. It happens, well, it happened in Europe, once again, talking about Yugoslavia, but much more often it happens, let's say, in Africa, and some of these events were really tragic. Irredentism. Irredentists are persons advocating the restoration to their country of any territory formerly belonging to it. You can understand how dangerous is that. For example, the place where we are communicating with you now, where St. Petersburg is located, for quite a long time used to be a part of Swedish territory. And in fact, the first town which was founded there was not a Russian city, it was now a Ninshad. You can imagine what will happen if Sweden will start claiming these territories. Even more, make a next step. What about the descendants of Mongols? And Mongols controlled the major part of the territory, which is Russia now. Well, dangerous, tricky, and we should take it into account. Sometimes there is international support for autonomy or secession. Sometimes there is not. For example, when Kosovo, once again a part of former Yugoslavia, wanted to become independent, and of course there were some problems related to differences in religion. Kosovo are some Muslims, not Christians like Serbs, and Kosovo used to be a part of Serbia. Well, some dramatic events happened. Refugees, something which I already mentioned too. So now, a very brief overview of some of the theories which deal with these problems. Two persons which you see on the slides are Americans. Apparently, one of them is a person of Japanese origin, Francis Fukuyama. Almost simultaneously, they published two books. It happened in early 1990s, and these books became very influential. Samuel Huntington published a book under the title The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order. The major thesis, I will tell a couple of words of that later, but now it will do to say that Samuel Huntington claimed that there are, well, initially he counted 7 different civilizations on our planet. Then he expanded their number to 9, which could become in conflictual relations with one another, especially if 2 different civilizations has a common border. Simultaneously, Francis Fukuyama published a book, Political Order and Political Decay, in which he proclaimed something which was called the end of history or the end of Indisms. Communism is gone, Nazism is gone, fascism is gone, so the age of isms is over. And Fukuyama predicted what will happen next, and what will become a global trend will be globalization. Common values, common patterns, common attitudes all over the world. Who was correct among these two gentlemen? Well, looks like, Fukuyama was too hasty. Really, we can still witness ideological differences. We do not need to travel too far. It will do just to mention our own country, which became very much ideological during Putin's rule. But similar things happen in other countries in the world too. What about Huntington and his civilizations? What you see on this slide is a map of different civilizations which Huntington suggested to discern. As you can see, Russia belongs to Orthodox civilizations, besides some other countries like Greece, Bulgaria, and some others. And besides that, well, he discerned between Western, African, Sinic, Confucian civilization, Hindu, Islamic, Japanese, Latin American, Orthodox, and Japanese. I already mentioned Japanese. What he predicted were conflicts. When one civilization comes into interaction with the other, how should we relate to that? Well, first of all, this is already historical data because a lot has changed. For example, China became much stronger in economical respect, and these are data from 1990s. But it looked that in all the dimensions, territory, population, economy, military strength, Western civilization used to be a dominant civilization. Now situation is changing, and situation changes rapidly. Well, it's absolutely obvious when we speak about population. Every 4th human living on this planet is Chinese person, ethnic Chinese person at least. Besides people who live in China, there are a lot of people of Chinese origin living all over the world. Another quarter of population are people who belong to Hindu civilization, not including Pakistan, which are also people of Hindu origin. So as you can see, speaking about what he called Western European civilization, well, there are some doubts about how long it will be able to remain dominant. Now, talking about predictions of the conflicts. According to his point of view, bloodiest conflicts in the future will occur along the border separating the civilization, because there are differences among cultures and they will not change. I would say that's too brave a prediction, a kind of over-the-board generalization. We'll discuss it with you later. Interactions in the world are increasing. That's true. Reaction to the West. In fact, people who belong to other civilizations, according to Huntington, they become more and more negative or disappointment towards Western civilization. Economic regionalism reinforces divisions. Even inside European Union, in fact, there are some regional contradictions and differences. For example, speaking about contradictions of maritime regions and significant proportion of population do fishing to earn their income over there, or industrial regions. So, what about the test? What you see in the slide is a number of conflicts between countries belonging to different civilizations, according to Huntington. And as you can see, in fact, it does not look like his hypothesis is apparently confirmed. What we can say that there are still a lot of conflict which happens inside what he thought to be some kind of, unified civilization. Looks like Islam became pretty active, 21 conflict. But if you build a really simple regression model, so the dependent variable is the number of conflicts which happen. And what you see into calls is independent variables. For the period starting from 1989 and ending with 1992, post-Cold War era, looks like if we are talking about two mixed civilizations, there is countries that belong to different civilizations. For the first point of view, it looks to be significant. But if you add controls to this model, distance between countries, and another variable, which is joint democracy, which means that two countries in question, two countries which were paired, are both democracies. The significance for a coefficient for mixed civilization will disappear. So it looks like democracy is more important prediction of the conflicts compared to what Huntington meant under civilization. But still, that's an interesting idea. And we'll compare it next time when we'll meet, because now there are only 2 minutes left, as far as I can see, with other theories. By the way, if we look at the previous period from 1946 till 1988, once again, we will see that what is significant is distance between the countries. So, for example, it's apparent that for the United States, the probability to start a war, let's say, with a distant country, and that applies to any other country too, is much lower compared to the neighbors. And another variable becomes significant, which is power parity. And talking about the previous period, starting from 1816 till 1945, that's when Huntington theory seems to be true. As you can see, this variable remains to be significant. Conclusions. There is not much empirical evidence for Huntington thesis. Once you control for distance, joint democracy, power parity, civilization membership has no effect. Further debate on the horizon. Looks like if you analyze the next period, some support could appear. And what will happen next? Will it be a dialogue of civilizations or something else? In fact, bullet number 3 is something which seems to be realistic. In some respects, this kind of contradiction, West versus the rest, still exists. And guys, I would stop at this point. We exhausted our agenda for today. If you have any questions, I will stop sharing for now. Please, I'll be happy to answer your questions. And if not, well, thank you for being with me. And you'll have my another lecture in 2 weeks from now.
Thank you. Goodbye.
My pleasure. Bye for everybody. I will meet with some of you at the seminar today.